Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
I'm Ian.
Today we're going to do another album shootout video. We've done a couple of these in the past. We've done Guns N' Roses. We did Use Your Illusion 1 versus Use Your Illusion 2. We've done Black Album from Metallica versus
Injustice
for All. I don't know, there's a couple other ones we did too. Oh, we did Billion Dollar Babies versus Sabbath Bloody Sabbath.
And didn't we do Nevermind versus 10?
Oh, we might have. I think we did that one also. But so today we're looking at Rolling Stones' classic album, Let It Bleed.
Versus the Beatles, Let It Be.
There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist we put together every week, and the Patreon page. Make sure you go check all that out. Like always, if you enjoy the episode, make sure to see a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time we release new episodes. So I guess I should preface all this by saying that I am a big fan of both of these bands. I think I'm a little bit more of a fan overall of the Rolling Stones music over the Beatles.
I'm probably the reverse.
You're probably the reverse. That's why I thought these would be a couple of good albums to pick. So I picked Let It Bleed. This was released in 1969. This was the follow-up to Beggar's Banquet, I think was what came out before this. This album here was more of a return to this like blues rock version of the Rolling Stones. Of course, they went through their whole psychedelic period with their Satanic Majesty's Request, which I think is easily their worst album of the 60s and 70s. And once they started back down that blues path and they got to Let It Bleed, they mixed in some different elements in their music. There's some gospel elements on this album. There's some country elements on this album. There's some kind of folky elements on this album. And I think, blending it all together, I know people look at some of the other Rolling Stones albums that were released in the 70s as kind of like their high point, like Sticky Fingers, I think is a lot of times held up, or Exile on Main Street, held up as their like Abbey Road kind of album. But I think Let It Bleed overall is a better album than both those albums I mentioned. I absolutely love this album. This was really I think this is the first album that, like, later years got me into the Rolling Stones. I was always a fan of their earlier stuff from the 60s. Aftermath, I've loved Aftermath since I was a teenager. But I'd say within the last 10 years, this was the album that kind of brought me into the rest of their discography and made me more of a fan of their music.
I will say that this has my favorite Rolling Stones song on it, which is Gimme Shelter.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of cliche because it's like a big hit, but it's one of my favorite Rolling Stones songs of all time. It's got great tracks on it. It's a great album. I don't know if I hold it in the same regard, though, but it is a great album. There's no question.
I think the thing that, I guess if I had any negatives on this album is, like a song like Midnight Rambler, I think doesn't quite work the way that the band intended the song to. Some of the great tracks on here, of course, Let It Bleed, I think was the only single off of this album. Of course, Gimme Shelter is a great track. You Can't Always Get What You Want, Country Honk, those are all great tracks on this album. I think outside of that one song, maybe-ish, and I wouldn't even consider that a skippable track. I think like beginning to end, the rest of the album is just it's just incredible.
So I guess I'm going to play the opposing view to a degree, even though I don't think you've made up your mind yet.
No, once we get to it, I don't know. I don't know which one I picked, but go ahead.
So, for Let It Be, I love this album. It's not my favorite Beatles album, but I love this album, and I think I love more of the songs on this album than I do on the songs on Let It Bleed.
On Let It Bleed.
Yeah. It has my favorite Beatles song of all time, which is I Be Mine. It's a George Harrison written track.
Look at this real quick.
It's got Across the Universe on it.
Across the Universe is a great track. Of course, Let It Be is a great track.
Let It Be, of course. I mean, that's a classic. Get Back. I mean, it's got everything. It's got everything that works. And I think because it is essentially the last Beatles album, I think there's some debate as to whether or not where it was recorded.
So this was recorded before Abbey Road.
Right.
But Abbey Road came out first.
Right. But this was released last. It was the last official Beatles release.
Yeah.
I think and it's probably true with Abbey Road as well, but you can see where the personalities are starting to diverge.
And that's where I was going to kind of go with, like, my negative aspects of this album.
And I see it as a positive.
And I think it does work, but I also see it as like you could see it, you could hear it on this album, you could hear it on Abbey Road, the destruction of the band, the rift that had been driven between Lennon and McCartney, I think really came through on those last two albums. If you listen to stuff that came out before, they sound like more cohesive albums. Even though I will agree that I think Let It Be and Abbey Road are, I think, the two best Beatles albums. But I think, like I said, I think you're right. Some of that rift between them did work on some of those tracks, but didn't work on others.
Well, I feel like it helped because it no longer was, in my opinion, a McCartney-Lennon tandem. This was the Beatles. Abbey Road and Let It Be, and maybe arguably more so with Let It Be. It was all the personalities are kind of showing through. I will say Ringo gets left behind a little bit, but he always did anyway. Yeah. There's more of George in this. There's more individual McCartney.
And that's the other thing, though. I think though, like John Lennon's, I think his personality kind of like overrode some of the other stuff on this album, or the possibilities on this album. I think George Harrison, even though he did have more of a contribution on this album, I think had the potential to be even better on this album.
Of course. I mean,
but John, personality-wise, I think kind of suppressed some of that.
Of course. And I think he did across the board, with all the albums, to be honest with you. And that's, McCartney was the only one who could push through that.
Yeah.
George Harrison's first solo album is basically all the stuff that he wrote for this and Abbey Road. Most of it is that. In fact, some of those songs that he did get through on those Beatles albums ended up being re-recorded for All Things Must Pass.
Yeah.
But like I said, I feel like you said there was a lack of cohesion. I think that the friction within the band was creating musical cohesion where the unit cohesion was breaking down.
Yeah,
that's how I feel about Abbey Road and Let It Be. Specifically Let It Be, because as Nick pointed out, this was being obviously recorded before, so it would have been less of that struggle.
But that's the funny thing is, like, comparing Let It Be to Abbey Road, I feel like there's more, like, there sounds like more conflict on Let It Be than Abbey Road.
Some of the songs are angrier.
Even though Abbey Road was recorded last.
Yeah, some of the songs are angrier, I think. Or not angrier lyrically, but just in the way that there's a rawness to this album. And we're not even talking about the naked version either, because it's been a long time since I listened to that, so I have to go off of this version. But there's a rawness to this album that isn't there with Abbey Road, I don't feel.
Yeah.
At least not all of it. And it's all of that emotion. Now, granted, we can only appeal to this emotional argument in retrospect, but it's all that I feel puts it above Let It Bleed. Because Let It Bleed is just the next Rolling Stones album. Is it a progression? Is it a better album? Sure. But this is like...
It's the end.
It's the end. There's a
finality to it.
A finality to it. There's an aggression to it. There's anger and there's understanding in it too, because I think everyone kind of knew what was going on. Like I said, George took all of his stuff that he wrote for this and made an album out of it. John did kind of the same thing.
But that's kind of like when I look at this album, I look at it as, you're right, it is a really good album. It's a great album. But I think I see it as some like lost possibilities also. Mm-hmm. Had they worked together more on this album, had they included George a little bit more in the process, would it have been an even greater album?
Oh, possibly. But this is the most real, and you could put this with Abbey Road as well, but we're comparing these two albums here. This is the most real the Beatles ever were together, in my opinion. Because the early days, it was that bubblegum pop, which is fine because they're awesome songs. They're catchy as hell. And then you had the psychedelic era. which again it's not real. It's real in the sense that they wrote it and it was what they wanted to do, but this is real as them as musicians. This is just them being musicians.
This is them being more mature musicians.
Yes, and even if you don't put the maturity in, even though it's true, it's just real. It's Paul McCartney is Paul McCartney. He's not the walrus. Yeah. John Lennon isn't the troubadour with the Magical Mystery Tour. Yeah. There's no Yellow Submarine. You know what I mean? This is just real. This is a real band album, even though it's not in many ways.
I know you said you haven't heard it in a while. I guess my other kind of knock against Let It Be is I love Let It Be Naked. It is a better sounding version of this album.
Right.
It is how Paul McCartney wanted that album to sound. They did not like the way that Phil Spector produced that album. It is Let It Be Naked is a more kind of stripped, kind of raw version of this. I highly recommend if you can find it on CD. It goes for several $100s on vinyl. That's why I don't have a copy of it. But you can find it on CD. Go check it out. If you love Let It Be, I'm sure you're going to love Let It Be Naked.
So if we were comparing, well, I guess let's get
okay.
Let's see where you land.
I know
I have a question.
I know you will pick Let It Be.
I will. Yes, it's
where hard. I land. It's like Sophie's choice for me. I think if my life depended on the choice, I would probably come down. I think I'd pick Let It Be.
Let It Be or Let It Bleed?
Let It Be.
Okay.
Just because it was the finality of the band, I think. Like, it's really close. I think I'd agree with you on Let It Be.
Okay.
What was your question?
Well, my question was going to be, because I actually thought you were going to fall more on the Let It Bleed side.
Oh, okay.
So the question kind of is nullified, but had you come down on the Let It Bleed side, would comparing just the naked version of Let It Be to Let It Bleed, would that have made a difference?
Well, no, because I ended up picking Let It Be.
I know, that's why I said that was my question, because I
think Let It Be and Let It Bleed are very close. I think Let It Be Naked is a little bit better of an album than both the other two.
Right.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that's fair.
So, I mean, if I pick between the three, I would pick Let It Be Naked.
Okay. And like I said, it's been so long since I've listened to that version. For some reason, I remember liking it better, but over, say, the last 5 or 6 years, the only version I've listened to is the original release of it, so my memory's a bit vague. I will say that I was surprised that they didn't reissue Let It Be Naked when they did the Let It Be box set.
Last year or the year before that came out.
It would have made sense to throw it in there. I don't know what was in the box set.
It's only been released. It was released on vinyl back in 2003. Has not been officially pressed since then.
So, what was in the box set? Was there room for it in the box set?
They definitely could have added it to the box set.
How much of a price jump would it have made?
I don't know. I probably would have paid. I would have paid
an extra $30.
I probably would have paid an extra $50 to add that album. But I didn't buy the box set because I think it was just the remastered album, and then I don't know if there was outtakes in there or what else was included. But Let It Be Naked was not included. Well, that's all we got for today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Like I said, I think it was a hard choice for me. I know it was probably not.
It was a little easier for me. I mean, because I don't want to discredit the Stones, because it's a great album. It really is. Like I said, it's got my favorite Stones song on it. It's just, it's my favorite Stones song. It's just between those two particular albums, I'm gonna fall on Let It Be. Like, if we were comparing, say, Magical Mystery Tour, which is actually my favorite Beatles album, I would probably go with Let It Bleed. Over that, even though that's my favorite Beatles album. So
for me, it was like, when I look at it, like, as much as I love Let It Bleed, the Rolling Stones went on to do better albums. I think Goat's Head Soup is a better album.
That's fair.
Exile on Main Street, I think, is an overall better album. Even though I think what makes Exile so great is it doesn't have Gimme Shelter on it. It doesn't have any of those big tracks on it. It's just a solid. It's a really good album from beginning to end.
Didn't you say it was overrated for the 70s though?
because they
comparing it to other
albums. Yeah, because it's often held up as the best album of the 70s, and it's not even the Rolling Stones' best album of the 70s. Right. That's why I did say it was a little bit of an overrated album. But I don't know. Let us know what you guys think. What album would you pick between these two? Like I said, I think it's a hard choice, but I'd love to know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep on spinning. Peace.